I had been with John for 6 years. Ours was a kind of romance that began with sparks flying, intense, exciting, magnetic. But somewhere along the way, the fireworks faded into silence. We used to lose hours in deep conversations, barely able to keep our hands off each other. Now that passion had thinned into something dull and distant. Our mornings were a reflection of that emptiness. He'd sit across from me, glued to his phone, while I quietly sipped my coffee. We played a quiet game of pretend, ignoring the widening space between us. It wasn't like we argued. The truth was worse. We didn't feel anything at all. We existed beside each other like two people in an elevator, close but disconnected. I never intended for anything to happen. Truly, I didn't believe I had the strength or desire left to want anything more. But then, Ethan entered the picture. There was nothing especially remarkable about him, not at first glance. But the way he looked at me, it stirred something, like I hadn't completely disappeared. We worked in the same building, though in different departments. We met during a training session. He held my gaze a bit longer than was appropriate. He asked questions that showed he was actually listening. He remembered what kind of tea I liked. He laughed at my dry humor, like it mattered. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless, just innocent back and forth, a small spark to remind me I was still a woman, not just a fixture in someone's routine. But it didn't stay that way. Ethan lingered in a way John hadn't in years. He noticed details others missed. One day he said, "You look tired," not as criticism but as concern. I felt something stir in my chest. Guilt, confusion, a flutter of life I hadn't felt in ages. John barely noticed when I got a new haircut. When I reached for his hand on the couch, he subtly pulled away to grab the remote instead. Our talks had become checklists, groceries, bills, errands. Nothing about us. Nothing about dreams, fears, or feelings. I began staying late at work, even when I didn't have to. The thought of returning home to silence felt more draining than another hour of emails and spreadsheets. One Thursday night, I found myself alone with Ethan in the break room. The floor had emptied. Dim lighting hummed overhead, and the vending machine buzzed in the background. I joked that caffeine had become my therapist. He smiled like he understood completely. When I reached for a cup, his hand brushed against mine. Just a second, but it was electric. We both froze. Our eyes locked, and something in my breath caught. "Sorry," he murmured, voice soft. "It's okay," I whispered before I could even think. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to John, his back turned as usual, staring at the ceiling. My hand remembered the way Ethan's felt, warm, intentional, like it meant something. I kept reliving that fleeting moment. It wasn't an affair, not yet, but something inside me had cracked open, and through that fracture, a quiet hunger began to breathe. I told myself I was still in control, that I just missed being seen. I smiled when Ethan passed by, let our conversations drift longer than necessary, but promised myself I'd stop if it got too close. That was the lie I needed to function. But I knew each exchange held more weight. Every time he complimented my perfume or tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, it chipped away at whatever boundary I was pretending still existed. Ethan never pushed. His patience made it worse. His restraint felt like an invitation, like he was silently telling me, "The choice is yours." And I hated how much I wanted to choose him. I started dressing differently. Nothing overt, a touch more lipstick, a snugger blouse, and I caught how his eyes followed me. The heat of it lingered on my skin, made my stomach twist in ways I didn't want to admit. At home, John drifted further. He barely asked questions anymore. If I came home late, showered before bed, he didn't react. A small part of me hoped he'd notice, that he'd say something to remind me of the line I wasn't supposed to cross. But he didn't, and I stopped waiting. It didn't happen suddenly. It was slow, subtle, like a string slowly unraveling. Ethan and I ended up on the same project, and late nights became frequent. We talked a lot about everything except what we were doing. One night he asked, "Are you happy?" I hesitated too long. "You don't have to answer," he said gently. "I already know." He reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. His fingers wrapped around mine deliberately, like he was offering shelter. It was just a hand. But the intimacy was overwhelming. Then he looked at me, really looked, and I saw it. Waiting, restraint stretched thin. And then I felt it, his body responding in my hand. That was the moment everything shifted. I could have stopped, laughed it off, said it was a mistake. But I didn't. I didn't want to. I tightened my grip instead, met his eyes, said nothing. There was a pause, fragile and suspended, like time holding its breath. Then it shattered, and I felt something in me tip over the edge. There was no dramatic announcement, no moral struggle, just a quiet surrender. I knew I'd gone too far, felt it in every nerve. And still, I didn't stop, because for the first time in a long time, I felt wanted, desired, and I let myself fall, not into reason, into feeling. I didn't pause to consider the fallout. The alarms going off in my head were drowned out by the rush in my chest, the kind of heartbeat that thunders when you've been waiting years to feel something real again. Ethan didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. My body had already responded, already given the answer. His lips met mine before logic had time to intervene, and I kissed him back like I was trying to erase every part of my reality. I gave in completely, leaning into the moment as if it was the only thing anchoring me. It wasn't slow. It wasn't delicate. It was intense, unfiltered, hungry. In that kiss, I tasted everything I'd been deprived of: attention, heat, emotion, not just desire, but presence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. He touched me like I meant something, like I wasn't just filling space in someone else's routine. I let him explore, and my hands responded in kind. My body trembled, not with fear, but with the release of something I hadn't even realized I'd been holding in. It didn't have to be Ethan. It could have been anyone who saw me, who made me feel again. But in that moment, it was him. And I gave him everything I'd been quietly starving to give. I kept telling myself I'd stop, that I'd pull back before it went too far. But I didn't, because I didn't want to. The line I once clung to blur with every breath, with every silent plea etched into skin. I felt him respond, more eager, more certain, and instead of fear, I felt clarity. I'd gone too far to turn back. There was no poetry to it, no gentle declarations or slow-burning romance. It was urgent, raw, and stripped of anything but need. Yet, somehow, it still felt sacred, because it was real. I wasn't pretending. I didn't force a smile. I wasn't holding myself in. I let go of the woman who waited, who hoped, who stayed loyal to someone who stopped seeing her. When it was over, I didn't feel victorious. There was no rush of satisfaction, just stillness. My body was still echoing the intensity of what had happened, but my thoughts started spiraling. I glanced at my clothes, at my phone, at the ring I still wore, and they felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who still had choices. He reached for me, tried to hold me, but I couldn't take it. I stood frozen while he whispered something I didn't fully register. I nodded anyway. My chest felt heavy, my stomach empty. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. I just got dressed button by button, like if I moved slowly enough, I could undo what had happened. I didn't look back at him. I didn't want to see if he looked proud or guilty or concerned. I wanted to erase it, but my body wouldn't let me forget. Each breath felt like confession. Each beat of my heart was a reminder. I'd crossed a line I swore I never would. I had betrayed him. Worse, I betrayed myself. There was no returning from that. The next morning, the world looked the same, but I didn't feel it. Sunlight filtered through the blinds like always. I woke up next to John like every other day. But something had shifted, or maybe it hadn't. Maybe the world kept turning exactly the way it always had, and I was the one out of sync. He didn't notice. He kissed my forehead, muttered something about needing to head into the office, and left like everything was still normal. That's when the weight of it hit me. He would never find out unless I told him. The guilt wasn't coming from him. It lived entirely inside me. I started avoiding Ethan, ignored his messages, kept my head down when we passed in the hallway. I thought that creating space might shrink the memory, but it didn't. It stayed with me, not just in the obvious moments, but in the quiet ones. I couldn't meet my own eyes in the mirror, without feeling exposed, raw. The shame came in unpredictable waves, sometimes dull, sometimes piercing. I kept replaying it, not because I wanted to, but because my mind refused to let go. John suggested dinner out that weekend. A movie, maybe. I said I was tired. He didn't push. I wondered if he noticed the difference. The way I hesitated when he touched me. The way I stared too long at nothing. I hoped he'd ask. I wanted someone to drag the truth out of me, but he didn't, so I stayed quiet. Eventually, Ethan gave up. He stopped reaching out. There was no scene, no closure, just a growing silence. And somehow, that hurt even more. It confirmed what I already knew, that what we had was never meant to last. It was built on timing, loneliness, and emotional neglect. He didn't love me. I didn't love him. We were each other's escape. Nothing more. A moment, a decision, a mistake. I thought about confessing, about sitting John down and laying it all bare. But what would that solve? He hadn't asked because he didn't want to know. And I didn't tell him because I was too afraid to watch something in him break forever. So I carried it. Every day. Every lie. Every quiet second between us loaded with something neither of us would name. The worst part wasn't the act itself. It was what it exposed. That I was capable of it. That when I felt unseen, unloved, forgotten, I didn't fight. I collapsed. I didn't ask for help. I didn't confront the problem. I looked for a way out and took the first one that looked back at me. I didn't recognize the woman who had done it, but I knew she was still there, somewhere inside me. John and I are still together. On the surface, nothing has changed. We smile in photos, celebrate birthdays, give gifts wrapped in politeness. But we both know something is missing. Neither of us says it. Some betrayals don't come with screaming matches or slammed doors. They live in the silence, like invisible cracks under polished surfaces. I haven't forgiven myself. Maybe I never will. Something broke inside me that night, not just between us, within me. And the worst part? I miss who I was before I knew what this kind of guilt feels like.